Morning, everyone. Good evening. So my name is Nicole Carpenter. I'm the Director of Programs and Education here at the Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I appreciate your patience and I appreciate you staying with us. We are going to forego that other piece of technology that we've been trying to work with. My apologies. I will do my best in the place of um, that other technology, but we will go on. We will speed up a bit of my intro to get into the information that you all have come here to see. So if you joined us for our other two pieces of video, thank you so much for joining us again. I do hope that you will join us for our future Tuesday Treasures at 6 p.m. every week. Tonight we're going to look at the writing machine. So we were going through the pieces and the parts of a typewriter. So really quickly, I won't go through fully. I hope you will see one of our other two videos that were posted this evening as a refresher. So really quickly, we have the keyboard of a typewriter. I'm showing it over here on our Royal typewriter. We have our keyboard. We also have the ribbon. The ribbon spool actually holds a piece of fabric that holds the ink medium of a typewriter. When you hit a key, the type bar, which is a part of the type basket, it holds all of the metal type sets for each individual letter and number. When you press a key, that type bar lifts, it hits our platen, this rubber cylinder in the back, which holds the paper and acts as a support. And the ribbon is sandwiched between the platen, which holds our paper, and the type bar. It is struck and it actually prints our letter on the piece of paper. The carriage return is this silver piece here, and that's what allows us to do that fun motion of moving the carriage, which is this top section of our typewriter, all the way over to the side. Again, if you have questions about that at the end, I may move our camera just a little bit closer so you can see these pieces a little closer. Actually, I do think at the end of our program, I will move you physically closer to the typewriters as I maybe answer some questions so you can see the detail that our other technology, unfortunately, was not letting us do. So let me jump into some of the general history of typewriters before I get into the specific models that we have out tonight. So the first concept of a writing machine, that's what they were generally called before typewriters, which is what all of these are. The first kind of idea or concept of a writing machine was actually inspired in 1808 by the Italian Pellegrino Turri. And he actually invented a writing machine for his friend who was blind. And that was actually the Countess Carolina Fantini de Fiziano. I apologize if I mispronounced that, but it was the first kind of concept of a product. The first working prototype of a writing machine. We have examples in other museums of typewriters and actual pieces that are written on this kind of writing machine that Turri invented. The first concept of a typewriter was actually from an Englishman named Henry Mill, and that was earlier on in the 18th century. That was in 1714. So the idea of a writing machine is a very, very old idea, but a typewriter is not quite as old as the 18th century. Again, that first working model is 1808. It takes another 60 some odd years to create a commercially successful typewriter. It's actually in 1870 that we see the first commercial success with what is called a writing ball. There was a Danish pastor named Rasmus Malling Hansen who created this kind of half sphere round ball that a piece of paper could be loaded in, and it almost resembled a pin cushion that these keys could be typed into and printed. It was a very similar idea to a printing press, except that the letters were placed on it and were actually pressed in as a button. The next fairly shortly after that, another typewriter that gained a lot of popularity in 1874 was actually from Milwaukee. There was an inventor. He was also a part-time poet and a mailman. His name was Christopher L. Sholes. And he went on to create the Sholes and Glidden typewriter. Now, this model was very popular because it had a keyboard setup the same way that we have our keyboards today. This 4-row system, numbers, and the 3 rows of letter, but in the specific alignment that we have today. So on your keyboard, that is the QWERTY keyboard or universal keyboard organization. The downside to the Glidden typewriter was the way that the type bar actually hit. So when these type bars hit on the Royal, we can see that it hits on the platen in the front. We can actually see when a letter is struck. It's very, very valuable in case you need to edit your writing, if you need to step away for a moment and come back. The Glidden typewriter was what was called a understroke, or more commonly termed blind typewriter, where the type bar actually hit underneath on the underside of the platen, and you would have had to lift the entire carriage, this section that moves back and forth, you would have had to lift that entire mechanism to actually see what you'd actually just typed. Now, we do have a comment in the in the comments already saying why we call it the QWERTY. So if you actually look on the keyboard up at the top, that very first row of letters, QWERTY is the word that is spelled out. If you know more of the history behind that specific wording, I know that it fits very nicely in the hand and it's easy to type, but if you know exactly why it's called QWERTY, please do let me know. But if you look on your keyboard right now, whether it's on your phone, your tablet, or your computer, you will see that actually written. And we'll come back to that word QWERTY at the very, very end. So anyway, this Glidden typewriter, you couldn't see what was being typed. And it made it very, very difficult to use that typewriter. Again, it was a very popular typewriter. It had this very, very usable keyboard, but it actually lapsed into obscurity because of the way that it was not very usable with sight. Typewriters, both the underscore and a visible typewriter, which is what all of these typewriters on the table are, except for one. We'll get to that at the end. All of these typewriters, these mechanical typewriters, were in popularity in the 20th century, the mid-20th century, early to mid. That's really the golden years of typewriters, is right at the beginning of the 1900s. As we move further into history, around 1950 is when electric typewriters gained popularity. One of the first electric typewriters is patented in 1900, but it does not catch on. It's not a commercial success until much, much later on. And then by the 1970s and 80s, personal computers are being adapted. They're becoming much more viable economically, and they slowly remove electric typewriters as well. Now I'd like to go into some of the specific models that we have tonight. Now again, all of these were lent to us for our program this evening. We do have one collection item out, and that's actually where we're going to start tonight. So one thing I do want to note is you will see me handle this object. Know that, again, it is not hurting this object. I am using our museum process holding this object. My hands are freshly washed, so don't be alarmed if I hold this artifact. Now, this very first one that we'll look at, I will hold up for you to see. It has these beautiful, beautiful illustrations on the side, and that is the form of the typewriter we're looking at first. And you can see it here on this receipt. So this is a receipt from for Benjamin Tokay. Those of us who live in Westport will recognize the Tokay name from Tokay Hall, which is a teen center. But Benjamin Tokay, actually, his father was a French immigrant who fought in the Civil War. And his son Benjamin, both Benjamins, went on to found the Tokay Motor Company, which built boat and later automotive engines, and they actually built some kind of pleasure cars as well. If you would like to know more about the Tokays, they are in our Becoming Westport exhibit, which will be open when the museum reopens to the public. So this receipt is to Mr. Benjamin Tokay. His company kept very, very good records, and this is a receipt of a Blinkensderfer typewriter that they purchased in 1899, March 20th, just a few weeks ago. So this typewriter is absolutely beautiful. If you can see on the sides, these little drawings, these are very, very portable typewriters. This company, the Blinkensderfer Typewriter Company, is actually founded by a George Canfield Blinkensderfer, who was a traveling salesman in the 1870s and 1880s. And one thing that he noticed was that traveling typewriters of the time, of the 1870s and 80s, were not, they didn't have the same quality as a true, like, almost a desktop typewriter, if you will call it that. So he did not like the quality of these traveling typewriters, but a true typewriter that sat on a desk, such as most of the examples that we see here, were extremely heavy and also not particularly useful for someone who was traveling. And he took this frustration and he developed his own typewriter. So this Blinkensderfer typewriter was manufactured in 1886. That's when it begins manufacture. And it was meant to be an alternative to these very, very heavy typewriters of the time. Now, in 1895, the company opened a factory in Stamford, Connecticut, and they actually distributed to Canada and France. Later on, they distributed to Germany, Russia, and Poland. And they had a very, very rich foreign market for their typewriters, extremely popular in Europe. By 1900, George Blinkensderfer, he had developed, as I said before, the electric typewriter. He patented it in 1902, and he was actually only the second person to develop an electric typewriter at that time. Now, again, as we were saying before, it was not commercially successful. It was not something that the market necessarily wanted at that time, so unfortunately it kind of faded into obscurity. By 1910, sales of even the normal Blinkensderfer typewriter was dwindling. With the beginning of World War I, with all of these domestic markets, there were a lot of travel and production bans that were put in place, and they suffered. Their company really did not recover from this time period. Even during the other world wars, they manufactured ammunitions for the U.S., but the company did not recover, and unfortunately they did go under. These typewriters, the Blinkensderfer, is a very collectible typewriter. They're very beautiful, very, very light. And many of them sat on a wooden base, as you might have seen in our picture, which I'll show you again at the end if you are interested. A beautiful, beautiful piece, and directly connected to Connecticut with Stamford factory. And then also this wonderful sales department in Meriden, Connecticut, where our receipt is from. Now, the next that I thought we might look at is this large typewriter in the back here. This is in Underwood. And again, I'll move our computer around in just a moment so that you can see some of the details of these machines. while I'm answering some questions. Now, Underwood is a very recognizable typewriter name, very, very recognizable company in typewriters. This model is from the 1930s. The company itself was founded by a German American, and his name was Franz X. Wagner. The Underwood name comes from John T. Underwood, who bought the company very, very early in its history. The Underwood company is based out of the United States, or it was. And again, this is one of those examples, a very, very early example of a visible writer where the platen, as we talked about, the type bar, hits on the platen in the front where you can see it hit, you can see it actually start to type out. And it made it very, very popular. Underwood models 3, 4, and 5 were made from roughly about 1900 until the 1930s, the early 1930s, dropping off somewhere around 33 or 34. These are extremely popular models, especially the number 5 model. They're actually the most successful typewriter design in history, this specific model, the number 5. And it was used by millions of secretaries, journalists, government officials, writers throughout the early half of the 20th century. Extremely notable brand. It's also telling how popular the number 5 was, that later on in the company's history, they made duplicates, basically. Much, much later on in its history, they would make almost identical models that were slightly different, slightly modernized, but they would still call it the number 5, just to harken back to this very, very popular model that brought up them a lot of success. This company eventually was bought out, and in the 1960s, its father company actually went out as well. So these are extremely popular, but not made anymore today. They're also very heavy, I will tell you, from moving it around. The other heavy, heavy typewriter that we have is this typewriter just over my shoulder. This is the Oliver typewriter. This is a print type Oliver typewriter number 9. This is manufactured by the Oliver Typewriter Company. Almost all of the typewriter companies are named that. Something like Oliver or Royal. It is established in 1896, so again, right in this highlight of this typewriter era, right in this golden age. Its founder was Thomas Oliver. He patented his first design in 1891, and then another in 1894. He had a very successful factory. He founded it in Woodstock, Illinois in 1896. Within 4 years, the factory grew to employ 300 people, and the town of Woodstock, Illinois' population grew by nearly 50%. It was a huge boom in the local economy. They produced, again, in the at the turn of the century, in 1900, the factory could produce 40 typewriters a day. I believe it was within 10 years, there was a factory expansion, and they produced 100 typewriters a day. So there was a lot of growth. This factory was so large and so important to the town that there was actually a semi-pro baseball team called the Olivers. It harkens back to last week's episode where we talked about the Westport Owls football team, a semi-pro team. So we have a typewriter semi-pro team, again, out in Woodstock, Illinois for the Oliver Typewriter Company. At the beginning of the 20th century, Oliver actually has clients such as the Carnegie Company, American Steel and Wire, as well as the U.S. Treasury Department, a lot of really large names. It's a very, very popular type of typewriter. It's also very distinctive. Most typewriters follow this kind of square form, front-facing type bars with this semicircle there. The Oliver is different because it has these two, what are sometimes referred to as ears. sometimes referred to as wings. It had a very, very distinctive style, very, very recognizable. The trouble with the Oliver was that by the 1920s, it was not as competitive as other typewriters of the time. Underwood and Royal are both competitors, and they moved to this very, very compact kind of design, and it's difficult for Oliver to keep its edge. The number 9, which is the model that we have here, it is also called the number 9 Oliver Standard Visible Writer, again speaking to this visible writing rather than this understroke or blind writer that we talked about before. This is a heavy model. This is nearly 30 pounds, and if you see on the sides, there are actually these handles, built-in handles for you to move this typewriter, because the manufacturer was sure that you would have a hard time physically getting this thing to move around. Between 1915 and 1922, there were 400,000 units sold. But again, as the 1920s, again after 22, as the 20s continue on, it's just harder and harder for Oliver to compete with these other companies. This particular model is actually owned by our executive director. The Oliver, the Underwood, the Royal, and this Max Writer, which we will get to the end, were all within her personal collection. We'll dive into that a little bit later, but this in particular was found at a garage sale, and because of its unusual look, it was added to the collection. Again, it's this very, very recognizable, unusual shape. The next that I thought we might look at is this Royal Portable Typewriter. The Royal Typewriter Company is founded by Edward Hess and Lewis Myers in 1904 in Brooklyn, actually. Now, this has another very strong Connecticut connection, as in 1908, they opened their manufacturing company in Hartford. They are known to be headquartered out of New York, but their true manufacturing center is in Hartford. They entered the typewriter game in 1926, the portable typewriters. Again, at this point, more and more people are looking to be able to move their typewriter, have a very portable model. And this company became the #1 selling typewriter brand in history. It's extremely popular. On October 9th of 1926, again, that same year that they launched their portable typewriter, the Hartford Daily Current reported the Royal had just produced its 1 millionth typewriter. Extremely, extremely popular, and continues to be the most popular brand today. There's an interesting story about the ruggedness of this typewriter. Again, a very, very clever marketing technique. George Edward Smith, president of the Royal Typewriter Company, he bought a Ford Stout tri-motor airplane in 1927. And he had this plane on its maiden voyage, on its maiden flight, drop 200 of these typewriters packed in crates with parachutes on the eastern seaboard to show how well they were built. This campaign went on, and over 11,000 typewriters were dropped. Out of these 11,000 typewriters flown over the seaboard and dropped with crates and parachutes, only 10 were damaged. So very, very well built typewriters. By World War II, so the 1940s, Royal actually switches over and stops producing typewriters to produce machine guns, bullets, propellers, and other parts for airplane engines due to the wartime effort. Today, Royal Typewriter is actually a continuing company. It's no longer called that. It is now the Royal Consumer Information Products. And they continue to produce mechanical machines, but now they are cash registers and paper shredders, among other kind of office materials. But they are one of the few companies that still live on today, even though they aren't producing these typewriters. Another typewriter that we have at the museum, actually on display right now in our visual storage gallery, is the Smith Corona traveling secretary typewriter, which is unique in that it folds over, folds up, and is extremely portable, extremely light. And it was very, very popular during during the World Wars, particularly World War One, because of its easy access and easy travel. If you would like to see that typewriter, we might post something later on our Instagram so you can take a look at that, as it is installed in an exhibit at the moment. And of course, when the museum opens to the public again, hopefully in the coming weeks or in the coming months, you will be able to visit and see that in person as well. The next typewriter is this orange typewriter in the back. This is called the Hermes Baby Rocket. This was produced in the 1960s and 70s. It is manufactured by the Hermes Pressica company, which is a division of the Pillard Incorporated company, which was founded in 1814. It was not originally a typewriter company. It actually produced other mechanical things such as jewelry boxes, singing clocks, things of that sort. Pillard is based out of Switzerland, but the typewriters were actually produced out of Sackingen, Germany. It went on to, Hermes Pressica went on to manufacture the both baby and the rocket models of their typewriters. This is a very popular typewriter brand because, again, it is made of a plastic material, so it's much, much lighter than its metal counterparts. It also features this very, very bold color from the 1960s, very, very popular at the time. This typewriter is actually lent to us by our museum associate, whose mother is also a collector. So thank you so much for lending it to us. The second to last typewriter that we're going to take a look at tonight is this small piece here in the front. And this is a toy typewriter made by the Marx Writer Company. Now, Lewis Marx and Company is founded in 1919 in New York City by Lewis Marx and his brother David. Their motto of their company was to give the customer more toy for less money. And it was extremely popular. Marx toys still exist today. They have a toy museum as well. They are one of the few companies to survive and actually thrive and produce revenue during the Great Depression. Their toys are, later on, they are plastics, but they are of a higher quality. They don't break as easily as other toys. And this toy typewriter is actually from the 1960s and 70s. And it's a testament to how sturdy and how well made their toys are that it is still here and still functioning. Again, it might need some oil to get its type bars going again, but it is still in very, very good condition, very good shape. In the 1970s, Marx is actually the top toy producer in the world. This is also another piece that is owned by our executive director. And when we asked her about the history of her typewriter, she said that this particular piece is what gave her her passion for writing, that it was a great joy to go and practice typing on this typewriter as well as writing it out longhand. So thank you so much for lending it to us. The last piece that we will look at tonight is actually a piece of my own. This here might be very sneaky sitting in the front. This is actually a modern keyboard. So this is the Quirky Writer Bluetooth keyboard. And this follows that same typewriter design. Again, it has that keyboard. It almost looks like it has a platen, and it does almost look like it has a carriage here on the top with the carriage return. Now, this is a functioning keyboard. It functions just as a computer keyboard would, but it's very, very satisfying to type with this kind of keyboard style. And it shows us how popular and how resilient these typewriters are. Even today with computers, people still seek them out as collector's items. They're very popular for programming. They're very, very popular for younger children to kind of have fun and play with something that they can learn on, as well as older generations who just enjoy typing on a typewriter like this. I will say that it might also help with eye fatigue and things like that if you really need to type something out. It's great fun to use typewriters. So I want to thank you for joining me this evening. Next week for our Tuesday Treasures, we are going to be celebrating the air wardens of Westport. You'll learn a little bit more about the men and women who were watching the skies of Westport on the beaches, on the hills, in the fields during World War II from some of the records that they left behind. So please join us next week at 6 p.m. We will have worked out all of our technical difficulties by then. I do thank you for sticking with us. I am going to look and see if we have any questions. Sarah comments that she learned to type in the early 90s on an electric typewriter. That's fantastic. Ramin also reminds us that Tokay Hall, the teen center, was built as an opera house by the Tokay family, and it's part of the reason that the building still bears their name today. Sarah also comments that she doesn't remember the model that she learned to type on, but she remembers it as a bulky monstrosity to appreciate the backspace key, and that is very true. Most of these typewriters did not have a way to correct a letter. Again, later on, those further models would introduce technology to erase and backspace and things like that. She also mentions that Benjamin Tokay, who bought the typewriter, lived next door to the museum. Of course, a true Westporter. Yeah. Let's see what else. Peggy said that she comments that she loved her typing class in high school. She typed about 40 words a minute. Apparently that's not very good. She says, I was horrible. I don't know. Sarah actually wants to know the mascot of the semi-pro baseball team of the Olivers. So the mascot was actually the logo of the Oliver Company itself. Let me see if I can move you all a bit closer so you can see some of the details. I apologize if I'm hard to hear for a moment. My apologies. And let me see if I can make sure you all can see. If you look on the Oliver itself, it's very, very hard to see. I apologize. There is a small decal in this corner of a very small, plump man. And that was the actual mascot of the pro team, of the semi-pro team. Not sure where this little mascot came from, but he is seen on the Oliver typewriters as well as the semi-pro team. Strange little tidbit. Someone asked, how than the Oliver is the Royal? So again, I mentioned the Oliver weighs about 30 pounds almost. The next heaviest is the Underwood. The Underwood is probably, again, I have not weighed it, but it is probably somewhere between 15 and 10 pounds. The Royal is not terribly heavy. Again, maybe 8 to 10 pounds, maybe a bit lighter. It's really with the incorporation of plastics that these typewriters become very, very portable. Again, this Blinkendorfer, they are portable simply because they are usually on a wooden base, and they tend to have just the bare bones of a keyboard, and the type bar, the type basket rather. So they really try to minimize the amount of equipment that they include with their typewriter. They don't have this large metal body on their typewriters. They have a much more skeletal piece. Peggy is a male 10 damaged Royal typewriters with dropping them out of a plane. They're extremely well made. They're absolutely cool. And I do have a few comments here commenting on the keyboard. It is beautiful. You can find them online. It's wonderful. We are not sponsored or anything like that, but it's just a great product, and it really brings back that appreciation for history. I love typing on it. It's a joy. Let me see what other questions they have here. Excellent. Alicia, or Ray, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, I apologize, says, in my high school typing class, I was told the location of the keys were a result of the ease of fingers reaching letters that are used the most. And that's true. That's definitely why this setup of has come into popularity. It's very easy to use. The ease of access or of use, the ease on hands is definitely one of the selling points of that QWERTY kind of setup. It's interesting to see, and again, none of our typewriters follow a different finger alignment, but it's very interesting to see some of the other brands that are on in different collections that don't follow that form, and how difficult it is to even think about typing on one of those. And Marit at the bottom says, which is your favorite? Oh, it's very difficult to pick a favorite, especially because these typewriters are all so different. I would say my favorite to use is my own, just because I know that I'm not hurting a historical artifact or anything like that. The Royal, again, the most popular brand that there has ever been of typewriters, very, very popular. But if I had to choose one that I think is my favorite, it would probably be the Oliver, just because of this strange design of it. I love the idea that there are bat wings on a typewriter. It's really lovely to look at, and they're just a joy to see. Ramin does also comment down below that this typewriter was restored. I restored this last year, I believe. Our executive director was kind enough to lend it for a program that we held. And it was interesting to get inside of that typewriter and really understand how it works. I re-inked the ribbon on that typewriter, which is something that you can do. The other thing I would say, just from a care standpoint from the museum, if you do have a typewriter of your own at home, we do recommend that you keep it wiped down. Don't necessarily clean it with soap and things like that. It's really, really damaging for the typewriter. But a very lightly dampened cloth just to clean the dust off is good. It's also good to oil your type bars. It will keep them from sticking. And then also on your your ribbons and your ribbon spools, making sure that they are free of dust, but also to not throw out your ribbon spool if it is metal. If your typewriter still has the metal spool, it is most likely the original spool, and we would encourage you to hold on to it. The ribbon can be re-inked. There are plenty of tutorials online that are absolutely wonderful, but we do recommend, even if you don't want to use the metal spool, to hang on to it, to keep it with your typewriter. You can purchase others online that are plastics and other materials, but these are the originals, and it's wonderful to keep it with your typewriter and keep it all together as one piece. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to put them down below. I or one of my other staff members will, of course, go through the comments periodically and answer anything that I wasn't able to get to live tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you will join me next week at 6 p.m. to go over the Air Wardens of Westport. Thank you all for hanging on so long and hanging on through our technical difficulties, and have a wonderful Tuesday evening. Thank you all so much, and have a great night.